Well, this happened on springtime. I was in my backyard. I had sown some grass in the garden, and I was watering my garden, when all of a sudden an UFO came from the sky. You know, an unidentified flying object, a flying dish. It landed on my garden, and out of it came a guy, very strange looking guy. He was an Andromedian. You know who Andromedians are, don't you? Those green beings living in the planet Andromeda. He was a PhD student. He was doing a research. The title of his thesis was "The Purpose of Human Life." And he said, "Can you help me? I have a couple of questions for you." Sure. Yeah, my question is this. What are you doing and what is the purpose? Well, nothing very, very special. I'm watering my garden. I want to get grass taller, and that's what I do. Oh, thank you very much. That's very interesting. And he took off, and he left. And I didn't see him for a couple of months. A couple of months later, I was again in my backyard. This time I was mowing the grass because it was tall. And the Andromedian came again, and I said, "Hey, how did you do? Did you finish your research on the purpose of human life?" And he said, yes, I finished. It'll be interesting in knowing what is your conclusion from your Andromedian perspective. Oh yes, this is my conclusion. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. You humans are funny people. You spend your whole life working in order to get nothing. There is no final purpose in your activities. All your work is going in circles so that the final result of your effort is zero. Look, 2 months ago, you were here watering your garden to get the grass taller. Now you are mowing it to make your grass shorter. What is the final result? You have spent 2 afternoons working in order to lead your garden, the same state it was at the beginning. And if you consider the other activities in your life, you will find the same pattern. By the way, said the Andromedian, one of your writers has written a book about it. Yeah, he made these same remarks centuries ago. It's the book of Ecclesiastes. Well, you have noticed that this is not a true story. Okay? I have just invented to make you understand how would it see, to see human life from the perspective of someone outside our world. But I would like you to think this morning, was the Andromedian right? Is the book of Ecclesiastes right? Is it true that we spend time and energy in order to get nothing? Is our life purposeless? Well, there is a book in the Bible which deals with all these questions. It's the book of Ecclesiastes. I would like to start with verse 1 of Ecclesiastes, because there we see who is the author of this book. It says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So here we see who is the author of this book is the king of Jerusalem, the son of David. This is Solomon, who was king of Israel 3,000 years ago, more or less. And verse number 2 summarizes the conclusion of the message of this book. It says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So the whole content of this book can be summarized in this little sentence: everything is vanity. The author observes the world that happens from his eyes, and after a reflection he concludes everything is vanity. The word vanity here means meaningless, pointless, senseless, unsubstantial, purposeless. Now, usually when a preacher preaches a sermon, he expects the audience to agree with his statements. It's nice to see people nodding when you preach. Well, today is the opposite. Today I expect you not to be in agreement with the statements that I'm going to proclaim. I expect you to react to my statements inside your mind, saying, no, Ramon, no, that's not the case. No. So I'm pushing forward, expecting that you will push backwards towards me. You might be surprised to find this book in the Bible. One would think that the Bible is about spiritual encouragement that should make you feel good. The Bible is not about dooms and glooms, isn't it? Well, the Bible is a very realistic book. It's not a collection of fairy tales. It tells the truth, especially when it comes to human condition. Now, in order to understand the book of Ecclesiastes, we must realize that Solomon here is taking a very particular approach. He looks at life with a specific question in mind. Look at verse 3. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? This is the key question that Solomon is going to try to answer in this book. So in the coming minutes we are going to analyze several aspects of our reality, and we will be asking ourselves this same question: what is the final purpose for this? What progress is it achieved? Is it really worth? What shall I get at the end? What are the longer-term consequences? What difference does it make, if any? Now, please notice the expression under the sun. We are going to be thinking under the sun, which means we will take out any idea that there is anything beyond the sun. That means that there is no creator, no spiritual realm. There is only matter. All what it is all what you see. Okay? Let's say that there is no God. And let's look at our life as if there were no God. That means let's see things under the sun. What is the final purpose down here under the sun if there is no God? What progress is it achieved down here under the sun if there is no God? Is it really worth down here under the sun if there is no God? What shall I get at the end down here under the sun? What are the long-term consequences down here under the sun? What difference does it make down here under the sun? First of all, Solomon is looking at nature, and he sees in nature no purpose. He mentions 3 natural cycles. One is moving from east to west, another one is moving from north to south, another one is up and down. First, let's consider the cycle of the sun in verse 5, chapter 1, verse 5. Also, the sun rises and the sun sets. and hastening to its place, it rises there again. So Solomon looks at the sun and he says, this guy is crazy. After 24 hours of working, he is in the same position he was 24 hours before. And same thing happens 48 hours later. There has been no progress in the sun's activity. It is just a repetition, an endless, vain repetition. Now you may say, hang on. It's important, the sun, it's important, its light gives us life, okay? Sure, we would not be able to be alive if we had not sun. Now let me ask you, what has been the final result of keeping alive all the generation that lived in the time of Solomon? What has happened to all those people whom the sun kept alive? Aren't they dead today? What has happened to all the effort to keep them alive? What has all that effort achieved today under the sun? What is the final result? What did the sun accomplish? Keeping people alive? But they are no longer alive. What is the difference today between having had the sun cycle in the time of Solomon and not having had the sun cycle in the times of Solomon? Those people will be equally gone today. Now, the second cycle that Ecclesiastes considers is the wind. Look at verse 6, chapter 1, verse 6. Blowing towards the south, then turning towards the north, the wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses, the wind returns. Endless turning around. The sun from east to west. The wind from north to south. Yeah, the wind blows south. What for? Well, to blow north. What for? To blow south. What is the progress that it's achieved with all this? There has been no progress in the wind's activity. It is just an endless, vain repetition that ends at the beginning. Now you would say, hang on. Now, the wind is important for us because the wind brings oxygen to our lungs, and we live because of that oxygen. Yeah, you're right. But what is the final result of bringing oxygen to your lungs? What has happened to all those people in the time of Solomon whom the wind had brought oxygen to their lungs? Where are they? What is the final achievement? What is the final result? What did the wind accomplish in keeping alive the people of Solomon's generation? They would be in the same way they are today if there had been a wind. Now, another cycle that Ecclesiastes considers is the water. Verse 7, chapter 1. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. Endless turning around. Waters run down to the rivers, to the sea toward the rivers, then up to the clouds through evaporation, then down to earth through rain and snow, and then from the rivers, through the rivers to the sea. Water is constantly moving into an endless circle in order to return to the departure point. Moving constantly in order to get nowhere. So the preacher says, this is nonsense. Yeah, you will tell me, no, 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 water is important. We need water to keep us alive. Sure, we do. That might be an intermediate step, keep us alive. But what has been the final result of keeping alive the people of the generation of Ecclesiastes? If they had had no water, they will be dead today, aren't they? Then Ecclesiastes takes a look at other aspects of our life. First, he starts with pleasure. Chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 says, I said to myself, come on, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said to laughter, it is madness. And of pleasure, what does it accomplish? So Solomon takes a very critical, maybe cynical view of pleasure and says, what is your purpose? What is the final result? Now, pay attention, we are listening to the most wealthy man in the 10th century before Christ. He was king of Jerusalem, the number one power in that time. He could enjoy any known pleasure, and apparently he did. And after that experience, he concludes that pleasure is unsubstantial because at the end, there is no achievement. The satisfaction that pleasure gives doesn't last much. And the question, what does it accomplish, implies a negative answer. Pleasure accomplishes nothing, hence it's vanity. Well, doesn't mean that pleasure is necessarily wrong. I like pleasure, you do. But the question is, what is the final purpose in the long term? Isn't it vanity? The next aspect that Ecclesiastes considers is possessions. Here from verse 4, chapter 2, until verse 10. The king of Jerusalem says, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself, from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had home-born slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds, larger than all who precede me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasure of men, many concubines. Then I became greater and increased more than all who precede me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me, and all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward of all my labor. Not bad, huh? Concubines, flocks, fruit tree, gardens, houses, parks, ponds of water, silver and gold, singers, slaves, treasures, vineyards. My God, you have been a successful king. You must be satisfied of your achievements. But Solomon was not satisfied, as we might think. Possessions didn't bring him any lasting profit. Look what he concludes in verse 11. Thus, I consider all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted. And behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Remember, this is the perspective we are looking at our life, under the sun. If there is nothing but what we see, if there is no God above heaven, if life is only what we see under the sun, then everything is vanity. Material possessions are vanity, in the sense that they don't bring everlasting satisfaction, no happiness, as King Solomon proved with his life. He had much more than you and me, much more than I will ever have, and he wasn't at all satisfied when he considers his possessions. Do you remember who was the wise man who wrote, "What's really important in life is to die having a lot of money in your bank account"? Don't remember the name of the author? No wise man has ever written this. Next aspect of our lives that Solomon considers is wisdom. And he will consider that wisdom is vanity. Look at verse 12, chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 12. Let's read until verse 16. So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. And what will the man do who will come after the king except what has been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall him. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. For there is no lasting remembrance of a wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. Well, here in certain sense, Solomon recognized that there is some benefit in living wisely. So do not encourage your children to be fool. Encourage them to be wise. Okay? There is some benefit. It's what he says in verse 13. I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. Now, since the wise man's eyes are in his head, it is more difficult for him to get into trouble. The fool walks in darkness and will face more problems in his life. In the days of our life, wisdom is better than foolishness. And Solomon admits that there is some advantage to wisdom. Verse 14, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. But in the long term, both fool and wise men will be forgotten. That's what says in verse 14 at the end. One fate befalls them both. What is this fate that will befall them both, the wise and the fool? Look at verse 16, chapter 2, verse 16. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. All, both, the wise and the fool will be equally forgotten. Hence the final result of a life lived wisely is the same final result as a life lived foolishly. Both will fall into oblivion. No matter who you are, how wise you are, how many languages you speak, how many degrees you have, one day you will be completely forgotten. Do you want to check how soon that will happen? Let me ask you something. Do you remember the 4 Christian names and family names of your 4 grandparents? You probably do. I'm not going to ask you. You probably do. Now let me ask you something else. Do you remember the 8 Christian name and family name of your 8 great-grandparents? 8 names and 8 family names. Do you remember? Well, if you are a normal person, you should have 8 great-grandparents. And if all them lived normal lifetime, they could have been alive in the moment of your birth. Do you remember their names? Your ancestors who were living when you were born, do you remember their names? Now, if you don't remember the names of your 8 great-grandparents, how do you expect your great-grandchildren to remember your name? Let alone the rest of your life. You will be forgotten. No, I do confess I don't remember the name of my 8 great-grandparents, and I do sleep very well in the night. Thank you very much. Furthermore, I don't care. Which means that my great-grandchildren will never care about my name. Earlier this year, my mother-in-law passed away. It was a sad experience, but most of the family was there gathering for the funeral and burial, and we accompanied the corpse to the cemetery. And I was there passing through the different tombs and reading the, how do you call that, epitaph? And the different tombs. And many of them used the word remember. Your family will always remember you. Your sons will always remember you. Sure, your sons will remember you. What about your grandsons? What about your great-grandsons? What about their descendants? How long are you going to be remembered? No, sooner or later you will be forgotten completely. You will pass away in the very literal meaning of the sentence, passed away. Do you know where are your 8 great-grandparents? Do you know where their corpses are? Do you care? Well, the same thing will happen to you. Just 3 generations. And you will see. No, you will not see. But they will see. What will be the final result of your life in the long term? 3 generations down the road. What will remain of your long hours of work? Nothing. Who will remember your pains where your teeth started to break up? Nobody. Who will remember your nights without sleep, your infirmities, your tears? Nobody. There is no difference whether you live wisely or foolish. The time will come where nobody will care 2 hooks about you or your existence. You will be totally forgotten, not only, but all your achievements in this life will pass away. The next aspect of our life that Ecclesiastes considered is work. And you guess what? He said the word is vanity. Chapter 2, verses 18 and 19. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun. For I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Earlier this year, I decided to put an end to my life, to my professional life, I mean. Okay, sorry. And I decided to ask for retirement. And you know how these things work. I had always imagined that the day coming, I will go to an office where will be a big door with a poster, pensions. And I will knock on the door, and I will find a nice civil servant there. Say, "Oh, Mr. Gomez, nice to see you. Oh, finally you decided to go on pension. Let us calculate your pension. Do you want?" No. These days, you ask your pension the same way you ask for a taxi to go to the airport. You just fill in a form. You connect to the human resource webpage, and there is a form. And there are several buttons. And at the end of the form, there is a button that says fin de vie. Fin de vie professionnelle. Okay? Now you click on the button. You did that. And you know what happens when you click on the button? You're off. Your professional life is off. And there is a message go to a computer which is in the cloud, wherever the cloud is. And then the computer sends another message to another computer, and it stops sending your salary. And another computer sends another message to another in 2 minutes you're completely off. That's it. 35 years of service, and like that. And what is the final result? Okay, nothing. At the end of our life, we will get nothing. Let's face it. You came to this world without a penny, and you will leave it without a penny. After all your life working, you will get nothing. The final result of all your life efforts will pass to someone else. Hence, work doesn't produce anything of permanent value, everything of everlasting value, because you must give the fruit of your labor to someone else. When my kids were younger, they used to ask me, "Dad, who is richer, Bill Gates or you?" And I said, "Well, today is Bill Gates, but the gap is narrowing." Sure. There will be a time in which we will have the same amount of money. The very day of our death. When the clock ticks midnight, Bill Gates will have zero. As much as I will have that very same day, the day of my death. Chapter 2, verse 22. Chapter 2, verse 22. For what does a man get in all his labor, and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? And 23 concludes, because all his days his task is painful and grievous, even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. The next aspect of our life that a preacher considers is time use. And guess what? Time use is vanity. Chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to love. Verse 8. I'm now in verse 8. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. Yes, there was a time for war. 3 generations ago, my great-grandparents were at war against the Filipinos. Yeah, Spain and the Philippines were at war. So, today, my son marries a Filipino lady. Oh, come on. There is a time to love and a time to hate. There is a time for... But Bernadine, do you realize that our great-grandparents meet each other in the battlefield? And they kill each other. But now, a more serious question. Do you care? Who cares? There is a time for war and then a time for peace, and war is purposeless. War is purposeless. For a long time I had considered this passage as explaining the rational use of time, saying that in our life we have a time to do some things and time to do some other things, which is probably true, but according to the context, what the message that Ecclesiastes is telling here is that our activities cancel each other out. There is a time to give birth and a time to die. So that the final result of doing both is nothing, because death cancels birth. There is a time to plan and a time to uproot. There is a time to sit and there is a time to mow. There is a time to water and a time to mow. So that the final result of doing both things is null, because uprooting cancels planting. I've been working for the European Commission for many years, and I remember at a certain point I was asked to do a project, to complete a project, which goal was to build a computer network to model the consumption of energy in Europe for scientific purposes. So the European taxpayer paid me to create this computer network. A couple of years later, my boss came to me and said, "Listen, Ramon, our priorities have changed. We don't need that network. Will you please dismount it?" So the European taxpayer paid me to undo what the European taxpayer had paid me to do 2 years earlier. What was the final result? Nothing. Let me read you a quotation by Mark Twain. He wrote, "A myriad of men are born. They labor and sweat and struggle. They squabble and scold and fight. They scramble for little mean advantages over each other. Age creeps upon them. Infirmities follow. Those they love are taken from them, and the joy of life is turned to aching grief. The release comes at last, and they vanish from a world where they were of no consequence, a world which will lament them a day and forget them forever." That can be a good summary of the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, what is the conclusion? What did Ecclesiastes, the preacher, the king of Jerusalem, conclude of all these observations under the sun? Remember? Under the sun. Well, the conclusion is that if there is no one else but what you see in your life, then everything is vanity. However, I guess you in your mind have already answered the question, and you in your mind, you have told me already, no, that's not the case. I will not be completely forgotten because someone will remember me. I will be in the mind of someone. I don't mean a database in a computer in the cloud. I mean the creator of the world. He will always remember. So let's jump to chapter 12, by the end of the book. Let's skip the rest of the book and go to the conclusion. King Solomon will propose an application in light of what we have seen. Chapter 12, verse 12. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. So, given that without God everything is vanity, then who is the one who gives sense to everything? To your life, to your strife, to your dreams, to your sorrows. Who is the one who gives sense to that? Not your family, not your relatives, not your boss, not your possessions, not your wisdom. It is your Creator. So, fear him and keep his commandments. What does it mean to fear him? What does it mean to keep his commandments? Well, this means relate everything that you do to the person of God. Be he present in your life every day, in your thoughts every day, in your heart every day. Live constantly remembering that he is the invisible witness beside you, and he is the one who will remember you. Put him in the very center of your life and relate to him everything, because without him, everything else is purposeless. Living that way, your life will make sense. Otherwise, it will be vanity. It's God who will give meaning to your life. Nothing apart from him, no one but him will remember you. No one but him. So praise him in your life. God bless you.